Welcome everyone, and today is another opportunity for us to explore stories around our topic, uh, which is seeing opportunity in devastation. And basically, what we are doing now is focusing on how do you identify and thrive in a seller's market. And Ed has got some stories that he would like to share. And welcome, Ed. Over to you.
Thanks, Jacques. Yeah, how do you move if you're in a situation where you have a problem, there's too much competition, there are um, too many sellers, not enough buyers. How do you move away from that into success? Well, there's some interesting examples. Let's take, for instance, Cuba. Cuba has an excellent education system. It produces a surplus of doctors because Cuba is basically a very small place. It produces a surplus of engineers. It produces a surplus of many professions. Highly educated population, small island, very little opportunity, everyone's poor, very difficult to make money, either for the state or for the individuals. So, what does Cuba do? They export doctors. And we had a batch of them here during the um, first lockdown period, during the first and second waves of COVID. And I believe the cost of that was 400 million rand.
Wow.
And Cuba, their biggest export is sugar, and their second biggest export is doctors for hire. Now, they've taken, I believe that to be the state, they have taken something where they have this dominant neighbor on their borders who doesn't particularly like Cuba. They have a weak economy founded on sugar with all of the variables and the whole world turning away from sugar because of diabetes. Um, and but a very fine education system and no opportunity for anyone. So now they could lose all of their talent. Every one of their doctors could move overseas and go and practice somewhere else in the world. Or they could harvest what their apparent problem was and make a business out of it. And they've done so very successfully. They deliver engineers, they deliver doctors, they deliver several professions all around the world as contract workers, but as a group, not as individuals. So now they've turned from what was a huge problem because they would have lost all of their youth talent. And they've turned that into something which is highly desirable, where these groups of doctors, these teams of doctors, move all around the world and solve individual problems around the world. I think that's a very, very clever way of moving from a problem to a really serious opportunity. I thought that they've done very well there. And so there
That
are,
is awesome.
yeah, yeah. And so there are many, many similar examples of how people have moved away from what was apparently a problem. The famous story of Airbnb, which some people may know, is two young men in an apartment, couldn't pay the rent, and so they had the bright idea that they would buy some blow up mattresses called airbeds and park them in a spare room and rent them out to travelers for short term stays. And they were in one of the capitals of the world where there were a lot of tourists coming through, so they could offer very cheap accommodation. And their Problem was to find those travelers. How could they attract those travelers to their blow up mattresses in their spare rooms? And so, being young and tech literate, they created an app. App was called Airbnb. And of course, Airbnb mushroomed from the air from the air mattresses. That mushroomed from a couple of blow up mattresses in the spare room to by a very, very long way, the largest provider of accommodation in the world. Um, Far bigger than any hotel chain has ever been in history. Far better than any group of hotel chains have ever been in history. Um, and still today, it is the de facto way that you would travel around if you didn't want to stay in hotels. So, out of necessity, came this gigantic business. So there was something that came out of a second thing that came out of a problem and got turned into this monster success story. Airbnb is arguably one of the best known brands in the world now. And again, we can go through little individual examples. The one often cited by my colleague Femi Adebanji, a very prominent public speaker, um, was at a very much lower level than Airbnb. But he was a toilet attendant at OR Tambo Airport. I forget his name now. But Fermi was there and he needed the loo, so he went to the toilet. The toilet attendant, instead of looking surly and looking significantly at his saucer with a couple of coins in it, greeted him and said, "Good morning, sir. Welcome to my office. Please bring to my attention anything that you find is not to your satisfaction and enjoy your time here." Toilet attendant. And so, of course, this was very impressive. And what happened? He got tips. He got very large tips. And his fame spread in part because Fermi used this story. Amos was his name, of Amos as the toilet assistant at Tambo, and people wanted to experience it. And yes, it was the same. And then this spread, and for several years, at airports all around the country, toilet attendants followed the same routine. The one, one in Cape Town said to me, "Welcome to my mansion." And of course, they were so pleasant that they got tips, often from overseas visitors. 100 Rand tips, 200 Rand tips for a toilet attendant. Now, they changed what is a dreadful menial chore of cleaning toilets and cleaning up bathrooms into something which was quite a serious money making business by taking a different attitude, by distancing themselves from all of their colleagues, by making themselves differentiated. And these are humble people. I mean, I don't think there are too many people that would, if they had a choice, become a toilet
Attendant.
attendant by choice. And once again, from need comes an opportunity, and from opportunity comes a business plan, and from a business plan comes money. And in Amos's case, probably quite a significant amount of money. I don't think he is a toilet attendant anymore. I'm sure he has gone on to quite a lot of very much greater things as time goes on. So, so once again, if you find yourselves in a menial area or in a no hope area, then for heaven's sake, sit back and think. how can I change what's around me? You have two choices if you're unhappy with your conditions. You can change your attitude or you can change your situation. And those are the only two. Otherwise, you stay the same. So you can change attitude or you can change your situation. So let's now take the examples that we started with. Um, and you had a wonderful example there, Jacques. You want to just regale us with that story?
I was scanning the podcasts and the favorite folder in my podcasts, and I found a Tony Robbins podcast, and he was hosting a gentleman by the name of John Foley, and I was like, okay, who's John Foley? And he was the CEO at that stage. I think the podcast was in 2020, um, and he's the CEO of a company called Peloton. This company was founded in 2020, and basically their mission was to bring work out into people's lives. And this means bring the gym to people where they were at in their homes or where offices, wherever they were. And their claim to fame was within the last 8 years since inception, this company grew quarter on quarter by 200%, exploded worldwide. And therefore, Tony Robbins had him on and wanted to know, what were the essential ingredients. And, he spoke a little bit about, what, it doesn't matter what your academic background is, what your pedigree is, if you don't have hunger as a teammate or even as a business entrepreneur, you're not gonna get anywhere. You're gonna die of hunger, and you could be the brightest mind. Physical hunger if you have no hunger for success. Anyway, um, now fast forward to 2022, and what's currently in the news is that Peloton has lost quite a bit of money. Their targeted earnings set around 4.4 billion, and they achieved something like 3.6 billion. And so that loss, obviously, investors were let's say, to put it mildly, concerned. What they then did was they then decided, well, it's time for a change. And the man that brought them to this level of success, John Foley, was asked to resign. I mean, here's a co founder and the CEO of a business that he led, and he was asked to resign. And so they made the announcement now in the news, and they're about to appoint the new CEO. And when they spoke to him and just to inquire as to what's happened, and how he feels about all of this, he just said, look, he takes responsibility for where the company's at. And he just said, we grew too fast. The one thing they could not have foresaw was obviously COVID. And COVID arrested their expansion and their businesses globally on a massive scale. And that's why huge losses. So they cut 20% of their workforce globally as well, to be able to make the kinds of savings to make the company sustainable. So what was interesting, the moral of this story is a core strategy was a change in leadership. And as Ed and I were chatting, and I would like him to just expand on this, is you need a leader for every season. Is that correct, Ed?
Well, there's certainly many people believe that there is a leader for the startup. There is a leader who can lead the company into that growth, and sometimes they're the same as the startup leader, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes the startup leader gets itchy feet once it's all working and the money is starting to pour in, and they get bored. They want something new. And then, if the business is wise, and if the leader is wise, they will part company and let him go on and create something new. And there are many, many such hugely successful serial entrepreneurs. that have created dozens, sometimes hundreds of companies and had immense fun doing it, made huge amounts of money doing it, and that's what they're good at. And then, but they may also be able to take their company because that's their passion and their life into the growth phase. And then, as the 200% quarter on quarter growth starts to slow down, if they don't walk away, then they will be putting themselves in a position where they have to run a very different kind of company. It's now a mature company. It's not so exciting anymore. The numbers are more important. Keeping the customers, looking over your shoulder at competition, um, keeping tabs on the share price are all the very important things at that time. And that's not the style of the go and kick doors down startup entrepreneur. So if you
Mm.
don't get rid of the person at that stage, or if he doesn't get rid of himself, then the company will often go into a decline because that person will be bored. And that person doesn't have the skill set to run the company in that mature phase. And then maybe at some future stage, you need to get rid of the person who ran the company through that mature stage and bring in another dynamo startup kind of person who will change it all radically and put it in a second growth growth spurt, perhaps. Or perhaps it's an industry that's a sunset industry and you just need someone to milk it for the maximum that you can get out of it before it goes out of business.
Mm.
So yeah, there's certainly a lot of people who, and I explained to you, I won't use his name now, but I've twice worked for a gentleman who was highly successful who subscribed to this theory, and at the point where he could have been CEO of one of the top listed companies in this country, he walked away and became a sports manager because that was his style. He got through the growth phase and he needed someone to take it on to the next level.
It's an amazing thing because it actually fits about what you said is when you go into that state of, and within context of our topic, our room topic, when you go into that state of devastation, no matter how you want to define that, two things need to change. You either change the situation or you change the attitude. It seems to me that a leader that has brought the company to a successful state now find himself in a mature cycle. If he's not able to change his attitude, they need to find somebody with the right attitude, because often you become a victim of your prior success. Very difficult now to change from that recipe, because now you're scratching your head. Is that you're so bonded to what brought you to that place? So so when the leadership has to usher in a change, it's a lot got to do with then a different attitude, which is influenced by how you what vision you have, how differently you see the situation, how differently you assess the situation, what you are willing to experiment with, because you are not compartmentalized or basically hindered by your historical success and the recipe of that success. You can try different things and you can think out of the box. Now, you know, the way these big corporates work, obviously, and that level is that person comes also with an understanding of what success was, but just coming up with a different recipe that worked in another company you never would have thought of, that particular approach, and the belief that when you shake things up, um, you can flourish even when your situation has changed and you cannot change the situation.
Yeah, yeah. There's a most interesting quotation by John Paul Getty, and this must go back, when was John Paul Getty? Around 1930s, I would have thought, somewhere about there,
Mm-hmm.
to the 1950s. And John Paul Getty said, in times of change, your very worst enemy maybe, or your greatest fear may stem from your own experience. Your greatest enemy may be your own experience. Now, just think of that as an interesting thought. In times of change, like a business going through a transition, or like the world we live in now, where there's a huge amount of change continuously all the time, we don't know from one year to the next whether we're going to be able to do business in a certain style or not. It's a very, very changing world. And yet we have all this experience which says that way works. Keep doing it. And Getty didn't live in a world that changes with the rapidity that things change now. Um, so it was a very, very perceptive quote of the day that
Yes.
he recognized that yes, you need to be able to throw away a lot of your experience and start afresh, learning new things. Brave guy, but then he wasn't poor, so his ideas were obviously worth listening to.
Well,
The
like with
wasn't
everything
poor
else.
is a bit of an exaggeration. He's a bit of sarcasm. I think at the time he was the richest man in the world.
Wow, but certainly a pearl of wisdom because and even if you're running your own business and managing your own business that you own, and you think, but I can't afford to take myself out of playing here. So it's the courage to change
Yes.
your own attitude. And I suppose you look around and you say, who's my team that will help me? Who are the different types of people? This is where you call a Ed Hatton and you say, listen, I want to bounce some ideas of you. Come help me. Come mentor me. Come advise me into changing what is necessary so that I can begin to flourish again. So I can actually turn my business around. So there's various options of tackling your attitude when you cannot change the situation.
Yeah.
Um,
Tha- And,
you know,
and that I can't stress enough, Jacques, that there is so much help out there. Um, People like yourself and like myself and many, many others, where we can look at things from the outside for a business and and often see things which are terribly obvious to you and I and not at all to the business owner or the entrepreneur because they are so entrenched in the business that they're not seeing the wood for the trees. And the objection to using a mentor is so often yes, but it's very expensive. And it always bothers me a little because what is the cost of losing your business? What is the cost of your business being massively damaged, of losing a large number of customers? You don't get invoices for those costs, whereas you do get from a mentor. And that's another topic that we might talk on at some stage in the future, the costs you don't get invoices for, which are often the bigger chunk of your total costs. Uh, but it is so foolish for people to say that for the sake of a few thousand rand, I'm going to make the same mistakes I've just been making because I somehow think I can fix it myself without help. It is not smart move at all.
correct. So that warning from John Paul Getty should be
Mm,
the consideration.
mm,
Therefore the motivation to say, okay, I am not seeing there is there is no shame in acknowledging it. That you cannot see. Let me find the help to do so. So
absolutely.
yet again, we've come to the end of our session today, but very riveting. And thank you for sharing those stories, for obviously preparing it. So I think we still basically, we still got a lot more to talk about in terms of flourishing in the seller's market, isn't that so, Ed?
Oh, yes. Oh, heck. I think we've only just started.
We've only just started. So we definitely going to continue with this series. And thank you everyone for joining us. And until next week.